Thank you. So we've heard how addressing the workforce challenges at one level is a state opportunity. And we know that states are handling this in many, many different ways based on what their resource mix, whether they're producers or consuming states. And we've also heard from Danielle Deane-Ryan how a lot of the answers are going to have to come at the community level. I wanted to turn to Jason Hartke. Your organization, its mission, based on the name, is economy-wide. And so if the response to these challenges is going to be micro, coming from states to communities, how does a national goal like energy conservation and efficiency get its proper attention and action here?
Right.
If we're working kind of at a micro level, does clean energy lose out to traditional fossil fuels, for example, without some kind of a national focus?
Great question. Where to start? I first want to thank EFI and NASEO for continuing to have this report come out every year. I can't tell you how valuable it is to our organization, and I know it's extremely valuable to so many others. I think I'm here also to in terms of the national picture, to underscore what it means to have energy efficiency, jobs continue to grow. You're talking about 275,000 jobs over the last 3 years. See, I used the 3 years, not just the snapshot of 1 year. So we're seeing continued sustained growth, 2.35 million jobs, 2/3 of all clean energy jobs. This is a big deal. And I want to just say, hey, we should have some excitement and some enthusiasm about what these reports are saying, because it really is so important to everything that we're trying to do and everything that we're trying to accomplish. So my one critique of it wasn't 150 slides, but it was a lot of slides. I guess it was slide 36, where finally it said policies matter. All right, so we've heard from Dr. Nelson, we've heard from Danielle. Policies do matter. They make a huge difference. A lot of us come from DOE, including myself, Danielle, Dave, others. And one of the big policies that we work on every year is appropriations. And I just want to give some, shine a light on how valuable it is to have $1 billion plus of research and development that goes into energy efficiency every year. $2.2 billion of research and development that goes into the clean energy economy that we're trying to transition to. Because that's what this is all about. I mean, we're talking about what these jobs numbers show, but from a policy perspective, the backdrop is climate change. And if we don't take action soon and we don't get more jobs in this sector and move faster, that's what this is about, and that's why the policies make a difference. So I would argue that not only do we have this foundational investment in R&D, in amazing programs like weatherization, I think is underinvested. The state energy program, another program that I think is underinvested. FEMP, building technologies, advanced manufacturing, the list goes on, ARPA-E. That's foundational. We have to do that not just for these jobs numbers, but we have to do it to stay competitive and have energy security. We also should be doing more to accelerate energy efficiency, clean energy, solar, investment in wind. And I'm a representative of clean energy and that economy and that transition. What else are we doing? In energy efficiency, we haven't had tax incentives for 14 months now. And I mean, that's in the context of what these jobs are showing, and this study shows, and in the context of the climate imperative, that's criminal. Those have expired 14 months ago and Congress hasn't acted. We also are talking about some big opportunities in infrastructure policy, opportunities to retrofit our schools, which routinely get a D score in terms of their infrastructure level from the American Society of Civil Engineers. I mean, when I got a D in school, I was panic mode. So our schools are aging. How do we invest in schools? How do we invest in residential retrofitting? How do we invest in grid modernization? These would all be huge accelerators, not just to the transition to a low-carbon economy, but to these jobs numbers. These jobs numbers are great, and I'm excited about them, but they could be so much higher. And so that to me is the question. How do we accelerate that? How do we get in that conversation? How do we take this report and get it to policymakers so they can make a difference? And I just want to make one note, because this hiring difficulty is a big deal, and it's been noted in this report a couple years. And legislators are listening. So the very first hearing at Energy and Commerce by Chairman Congressman Rush, very first hearing that he had just a week ago, was on workforce. And not only did he have a hearing on it, but he introduced a bill to address how do you go from blue collar to green collar jobs. And that bill is now out and about. Groups like ours are supporting it, and many others. But that's exactly the type of thinking that we need from policymakers. How do you transition the data and the analysis from these reports to sound policy that can get across the finish line and help us accelerate to a clean energy economy?
Phil, I'd like to go
My
down
pitch.
the line to you and say your surveys of employers, you start out with about 30,000 companies, energy companies that you contact, and then you have a smaller number that you talk to in more depth. You're looking backward at what's happened. Would you speculate a little bit and look forward and where you think these trends are going? If the economy eventually slows down, the labor market gets less tight, would these pressures on hiring ease up? Or do you see that this difficulty in getting the right people for the right jobs is going to keep getting more acute?
So you know I'm a lawyer by training, so I'm just going to say yes. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So first off, when we look at difficulty hiring and we think about just sort of the supply and demand metric, clearly if there is an economic recession and lots of people get laid off, then there's a greater supply of people with talent and probably some reduced demand, right? So the simple answer is yes, and we can, it will get easier, and we can look back to 2010 when there were almost 90,000 unemployed or underemployed electricians, licensed electricians in San Diego County, right? So if you're a solar company in San Diego County in 2010, you have a job for $25 an hour, and you get a master electrician to show up and say, I need work, I'll work for $25 an hour. And then you fast forward 6 years later, and that master electrician's making $120,000 a year as an electrician somewhere. Your solar company's sitting around saying, gosh, I can't get these great people for $25 an hour anymore. What happened, right? So that's real, okay, that's real. Now there's some important lessons we can learn from that. One is a lot of the pathways out of poverty programs in particular were essentially taking people off the street and saying, in a short period of time, we're going to train you how to be a solar installer. And we were doing that in 2009, 2010, 2011. And they were competing with electricians with 25 years experience, and none of them got jobs. I don't want to say none, but almost none. I mean, statistically, probably pretty close to zero. So all these organizations now don't want to do solar training anymore. They're like, whoa, I got burned on that one. I don't want to send 100 people through a training program. Now is exactly the time when we should be doing it, right? Because there's shortages. So the people who are on the sidelines, now is their opportunity to get integrated. And what makes me a little bit nervous is that we're going to wait until there's a downturn and there's another 90,000 unemployed electricians in San Diego County, and we're going to train a bunch of people who have never done any electrical work before to be solar installers. So that's one way that policies matter, because we're going to stick with that theme. The other way that policies matter, though, and the way that you can continue, hopefully to both decrease difficulty but continue to put the foot on the gas of the economy, right, is that if you do the training and get people off the sidelines now and start getting those training pipelines built and invest in things like building retrofits in schools and multifamily residences and office buildings, the runway is so long that I'm not exaggerating by saying you could double the construction sector tomorrow if you just picked one of those segments and said, we're going to do deep energy retrofits in all the multifamily housing across the United States. We're talking many millions of jobs would be required to do that. So there is so much opportunity in the building space for energy efficiency that if we were to say we want to make a serious commitment to train and employ 1 million people, we could do it, right, with the right policies in place to do both, to training the right folks for the right opportunities and investing in those retrofit programs. We could do it. And you could see both a decline in the difficulty hiring and an increase in the job outputs. So they don't have to be so closely linked, right? but it will require significant action and a real focus on who's unemployed, right? Just a statistic that 44% of African American men in Greater New Orleans are unemployed. That's something we could fix.
So we've taken the challenge of job training for a changing economy for granted, would you say? We look at STEM, K through 12. That's important. That's necessary. Not sufficient.
Right.
Apprenticeship programs are sort of left to fend for themselves. Companies are still kind of hanging up a shingle and saying, if you want to walk up to our door, we'll be happy to talk to you. But what are policies that might make a big difference here, and how do they come about? And really for anybody on the panel.
So I'll just very quickly say that I do think supporting apprenticeship is key. Supporting apprenticeships for things that we don't always think about as being natural fits for apprenticeships. They work for any type of job, really, and most employment opportunities, there's some sort of informal apprenticeship process with it. Again, I think that, and this is why Danielle's work is so important, and others who are focusing on this equity and access issue, is find the populations of folks who are looking for work and can't get, and have barriers, or aren't getting in the door. Find out what that population is, work with that population to get to the opportunities, and make sure that you're focusing on jobs. These are good jobs, right? And recognizing that we understand that these are good jobs that pay good wages and good benefits. So I think it's I think it will take some work, because a lot of workforce development boards and community colleges, as I said, got burned during the high unemployment period, where there were more people than jobs, and we have the opposite problem now. So I think it's just being a little bit smarter about linking supply and demand and being more proactive than reactive.
When we look at the report, you see that in aspects of oil and gas production, the difficulty was minor. This was not a big problem for building pipelines and extracting oil and gas. But more problems in some of the cleaner energy technologies. Is it possible that if the job mismatch doesn't get solved, that the clean energy movement is going to really be affected? That the clean energy goals are not going to be achievable or be less realized because of the problems of getting people to work in these jobs?
Yeah, so job quality is one of these challenges, right, where scarcity drives up wages, which is good for workers, bad for business, right? So I think, there's interesting interplays, but certainly greater availability of talent, bringing the cost down of talent, those allow you to do more, to do a lot more deployment. But I'm sure some of the other panelists have thoughts on this.
A couple comments. One, I think that you do need policies, and preferably coordinated policies at the federal, state, and local level. I really like what Dr. Nelson was saying in terms of partnership and policy, and those working together and being complementary. And there are some really strong policies that have happened over the years. I'm thinking of the Department of Labor project that they had with SEIU's chapter in New York City to do 100 or 1,000 green supers, and it was training supers in New York City to have the skills to drive energy efficiency and other applications and technologies in their day-to-day work. SEIU was doing a lot of the work. I think unions have been doing a lot of this workforce training. How does that link up with both federal and state policy? And then also you've got groups like the American Association of Community Colleges that have been doing a lot of work in vocational training. There is an underinvestment there, so there needs to be a government intervention, and there's a variety of, I think, opportunities there. I think Phil makes a great point in terms of how do you reframe these jobs. One, I think we all know these are good jobs, but millennials are interested and they're driven by passion and what they want to do, what they see as aligning with their values. And I think there's a way to to present these jobs in a way that when you go into one of these construction jobs and you're working 75% of your time on energy efficiency, retrofitting of projects or solar installation, that maps back to your values and your core passion. I mean, when you look at what energy efficiency is doing for the planet, you're talking about $800 billion of collective energy savings every single year. You're talking about a major contribution to greenhouse gas reductions. You're talking about climate resilience. And I think that reframing those jobs in a way that's powerful and meaningful to young people, people of color, people in vulnerable communities will go a long, long way in attracting those folks to these jobs.
I think the other key thing as well is being very careful as you're looking to reframe these jobs or make these policies. Some of these ideas fall down on implementation when the right folks are not around the table. So last week at the hearing that you mentioned, the rush hearing on blue-collar jobs to green-collar jobs, we heard from Gil Campbell, African-American entrepreneur, head of Volt Energy. They're putting solar on at Howard, not too far from here. He's working with the mayor at the D.C. Infrastructure Academy. He's on the board of an organization in the community, one of the low-income communities as well, where they were able to look at students who had high unemployment, and people that had returning citizens, high incarceration rates, and get them eventually into jobs with the training with an average wage of $18 an hour. So you can't just send anyone when you're looking to reframe these jobs, and for the folks that understand what it takes to move folks through these and attract them and implement them effectively, diversity and equity really matters there as well.
Absolutely.
I want to comment on this maybe in just a little bit different way and speak, specifically about Utah, because I really think context does matter. Utah actually has the youngest population in the country, and sometimes people don't know that. We also have an incredibly fast-growing population. Our population is set to double in the next 25 plus years. And, if you compare that maybe to, the size of California, I mean, we've got just over 3 million people today, and we're talking about going to 6 million people. But it's still impactful, especially when much of this is occurring along this urban corridor I mentioned, and our rural communities are struggling, which is where our conventional energy production has taken place. So what we're really concentrated on right now as a state is what I think Jason referred to as having this context of, energy jobs matter. And how we deploy those jobs and how we inform on those jobs is critical. And that has to be organized between workforce, it has to be organized between economic development, and it has to focus on our communities and build on our partnerships. And so that's what we're really doing today, is tying this unprecedented growth for our state, our young population, to create a context around what I think we all now will refer to as smart growth strategies. And it all has to come together in that context. So I just want to highlight the importance of that context.